This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, virtual selling masterclass. Now, we are well over 2 years into the pandemic. I'm going to call it virtual selling is here to stay. I actually saw a survey on LinkedIn from Scaled Consulting. Their CEO, Jake Dunlap's actually been a guest on the podcast previously. And what was interesting about this survey was it was suggesting that the majority of business-to-business buyers were actually saying they were preferring being engaged and sold to virtually rather than in person. And if we think about this in the media sales arena, and we wonder why this might be, it does make sense, right? If you're in agency sales, most media agencies are working hybrid, if not still fully remote. Think back a couple of years, video conferencing and email right now are our primary communication channels. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but those are predominantly the two channels that we are using to drive our business. A couple of years ago, it seems like a lifetime ago, but face-to-face, the phone, were really the drivers of business, and then the email was somewhat used to confirm and to obviously pass information, and very much around implementation as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. Obviously, I think, it's just that old approach of going out to market and doing X amount of face-to-face meetings a week, those days feel like they're behind us, and I feel like a lot of people are struggling to figure out how to hack the technology to make this new world feel comfortable and feel normal. Virtual selling has plenty of benefits, right? I just think nobody really feels like they've fully mastered it yet. So we've brought him back. Our returning guest is Dave Roddick of Kinzler. They are a specialist consultancy. Dave, prior to that, was a very senior media leader across the UK. I believe he's worked across a number of countries, most recently in Australia. He started Kinzler. It's very specific what they do, and I'm going to let him tell you more about what they're actually doing. Suffice to say, he is the perfect guest for this very specific topic.
The first five.
Dave, welcome.
Hi, Jamie. Great to be back, and lovely to see you again.
When we last spoke, you had just gone out on your own and started Kinzler. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing there lately.
Kinzler, as you may recall, is a sales consultancy, but really with a look at the selling process and the process of sort of business transactions through the lens of what goes on in your head. So the sort of neuroscience angle, if you like, of why people do business with one another, and why salespeople manage to sell to one person and with exactly the same proposition don't sell to another. So it was very much geared towards, as you might expect, salespeople. What I've been doing in the last period of time really is been working not just with sales organizations, but also with buying organizations and especially agencies, because they're wrestling with the whole selling their proposition to clients and finding that in the new normal with more and more remote contact and more depending on the chemistry of the people involved, they need to get under the skin of exactly what's going on in people's heads rather than rely on tools or systems or processes that previously differentiated them. Now the proposition is pretty homogenous, so it's all about the people. So that's a surprising angle for me, and I've been spending quite a bit of time in the agency world, working with them on how human interactions work.
It's absolutely fascinating, and obviously you've come from a media sales leadership background too, Chief Sales Officer of Foxtel. I think prior to that, National Sales and Marketing Director of AdShell. You've done things in the UK, so it's a really almost the perfect cross-section of experience and knowledge to tackle this topic, because virtual selling seems to be here to stay. I'm going out on a limb and saying that it's sticking around long term. We're going to be focusing primarily on video conferencing today in our chat, but when we talk about media sales, I suppose just from your experience, Dave, what are the different communication channels that you're seeing media salespeople rely upon, and how has that changed over the past 2 years from the period prior?
Yeah, I think this has been an evolution that's been taking place probably before the impact of the pandemic. When I first started selling, way back in the day, so in the late 18th century, there was, you walked into a sales department and it was marked out by the buzz, the noise, the level of energy that was sort of audible as well as tangible in terms of just how people were interacting, because they were all on the phones and they were and holding face-to-face meetings in the offices. That has gradually changed over the years, and of course been accelerated by the pandemic, I think, so that sales divisions and sales departments within media organizations are not as noisy as they were as people move towards more technology-based communication, email, and increasingly, I think over the last couple of years, there's been a massive rise in the impact of social media as a communication tool. People are texting each other. I do a bit of work with a group whose communication with their buying community is entirely through WhatsApp. Now that's something that I had never come across before the pandemic. If you remember, about 6 or 8 months ago, there was an outage at Facebook, and WhatsApp went down, and they literally could not communicate with their clients. They were all of it was done through WhatsApp groups. That's something that was never really around before. So definitely seeing the rise in social as a communications channel, and it's probably come at the expense, I would say, of the old-fashioned dog and bone. That the telephone is seems to be the poor loser in this. Face-to-face still has a role to play, I think, but other channels seem to be replacing telephone conversation. I don't know if that's your experience too, Jamie. Given the amount of reference points and context that you get.
The observation I'd make very broadly is, in a media sales context, a couple of years ago, I used to think that face-to-face interaction and phone correspondence would really drive the business, and email was something of a tool to document or to communicate messaging to multiple people and to sort of relay information around the more specific buying elements of a deal as opposed to the sell, if that makes sense. Whereas now I'm really seeing that invert. I feel like virtual, like video calls, to an extent, the phone has a role still, but it's really video calling and email seem to be the primary channels we lead with. And I think you're right. People are getting quite fancy with things like LinkedIn. I know in America in particular, like LinkedIn seems to be the domain of a lot of salespeople, and they use that to not only prospect, but to actually reach out to prospective clients and send videos and things like that. So it does feel like the world is changing a little bit, but the biggest shift I've seen, mate, is absolutely, virtual or video conferencing replacing face-to-face as almost a direct substitute.
Well, I think both face-to-face and phone, and the number of interactions that I hear in the media space, which start maybe as a phone call, and then it's, let's just quickly jump on a Teams call. Can you quickly jump on Zoom, and I can show you what I mean? That kind of dialogue tends to, I come across more and more as something that starts maybe as a conversation on the phone, and then quickly evolves into a video call because I just want to show you this document. I just want to share screen with you for 5 minutes. And it's become such a natural part of our back and forth that it doesn't, back in a couple of years ago, we would be diarising these video conference calls weeks in advance because you have to reserve the technology. Now everyone's using it day by day, hour by hour.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and I think this is what sort of led us to do an episode around this whole thing, because it is just a unique space. I think people are definitely better than they were 2 years ago. Like, I think we've definitely been in a forced adaptation. The muscle memory is now there. Now, to me, it's around how do we actually optimize the technology and how do we somewhat hack the technology and make sure that we're using the right communication channel for the right moment or the right context or the right stage of the process.
Media Sales Mastery.
Here's kind of the main topic. You'd know this from your time leading big national sales teams. Whether it's a 4-step process or a 6-step process or a really detailed sales playbook, most media organizations have a predefined sales process that their sales team will typically follow. So in this new, let's say, post-pandemic world, is it just a case of dropping in a video call in place of a face-to-face meeting? Can we just substitute that in the process? Or do we need to rethink these processes entirely?
It's a great question. I think it's not a question of rethinking the processes or the sales methodology. It's a question of being really clear about the channel that's appropriate for each of those, because there are certain processes that are still natural and necessary, and they make logical sense, but they're going to be very difficult to achieve in a virtual context. So take a discovery session, for example, which would be a common feature of most sales methodologies, I would imagine, in some form or another. a process whereby you're talking to a client for the first time and discovering their what we used to call needs, but I think is now called aspirations and afflictions, pain points, whatever the process that you're using, and trying to uncover and unpack what is going on in their world so that you can devise a solution that really fits that need. That's a very collaborative process that requires a high degree of trust, and it's something that's very difficult to do if you're exclusively communicating through video technology. So it's a question of not necessarily just taking the method and dropping it into a virtual world. It's picking and choosing where that will be effective. So it may be that, for example, the sharing of the solution, having talked through how that works, the sharing of the solution might actually come in a video call, having done a lot of work in the face-to-face world to establish and understand need and to establish those rapport and trust points that are going to lead to a much more fruitful and productive working relationship. That's established the basis on which you can then communicate on a video call, for example, to communicate your solution or to close the deal. So it's I'd be cautious about saying certainly don't throw away your sales methodology. That's definitely not worth doing. But working out where to use the different channels of interaction, I think is a worthwhile exercise.
We might jump into it a bit later in the episode, but the idea of doing an uncovery on a video call, the impersonal nature of that, and the limited amount of data that you might be getting around body language and tonality and just a general sense of, being able to read the room, in inverted commas. One of the things I think would be interesting to explore there is whether actually in that instance, sometimes a phone uncovery can actually be a better way to do it. There is a different context when we're on the phone. So people seem to speak differently on the phone. There seems to be a little bit more openness. So those are the kind of things I think are really interesting to start thinking about. And you're absolutely right. Yeah, we don't throw out the playbook, but there are definitely some things in the playbook that maybe are difficult to replicate virtually that used to be face-to-face.
Yeah, for sure. And one of those, for example, one of the things you've touched on there, one of the things that I certainly did throughout my sales career, and certainly I do now working with sales teams, is make sure that people are really welcoming objections, right? So this is something that is, again, probably a cornerstone of most sales methodologies. Don't run away from objections. Actually welcome them. They're an important signpost to how you're going to secure a buy from the other side, from the buy side.
Yeah.
So now spotting the marks and spotting the signals that there is an unstated objection, because the thing that will sink your deal is an unstated objection, right? That's the killer of the deal. You need to surface it, flush it out, be able to resolve that concern. And a lot of those markers that there are objections being held by the buyer are non-verbal and difficult to pick up on a video call, because in the same way that you would face to face, you're just much more intuitively guided by your senses to feel that something isn't right. There's something being held back here. You're not quite comfortable with this, are you? And I need to understand why that is and what concerns and issues you still have that I need to resolve. So that's a very tricky thing to do if you're exclusively communicating through technology.
I think Zoom fatigue is one issue, right? We know that is a big issue, right? I know personally I experience it, but a common challenge I'm hearing from a lot of media sales professionals too is when they are on a video call, they don't feel like they have the attention or the full engagement of the audience. They're on the call, but maybe they're present, but I don't think that they're actually actively engaged in the call the way that they would have to be in the room. The social contract is missing. Why is this, and how would a media salesperson deploy some tactics to kind of try and overcome this, or just bring them back into the conversation?
Yeah, right. This is a fascinating thing, right? So over the course of the pandemic, at Kinzler, because of the way what we do, we've been surveying regularly attitudes to video calls and attitudes to people's approach to interaction through technology. And we've seen that attitude evolve enormously over time. So while people behaved badly on video calls from day dot, from the moment that they were part of our working day, they've had their attitude and approach has actually deteriorated over time. So In the early days of the pandemic, the surveys that we were sending out, typically, the Kinzler universe was coming back, and it's been pretty steady over these last 2 years. That about 70% of people admit to doing other things while they're on a video call. So I'll look at my emails, I'll finish off a presentation, I'll answer a text or whatever it is. 70% of people admit to doing that. But now we're seeing this new phenomenon where 63% of people actually plan to do things on video calls that are not part of the meeting. So I'm actually reserving time for being non-attentive and non-engaged in my meetings. I'm going into that going, I've got a video call lined up with Jamie. That's when I'll finish that email, and that's when I'll just review that presentation. Or I'll read that when I'm in this meeting. Now, this is stuff you would not do. I assume people wouldn't do it in a face-to-face setting. You didn't go into sales meetings thinking I'm going to finish my email while I'm sitting in that meeting. We've all probably met people who do think like that, but they're the exception, right? But this is a habit and a behavior which has become almost accepted, and to the point where people are, as I say, are actually planning for distraction and poor behavior and poor attention in video settings. The reason for this is simply biological. Without going into too much detail, and stop me if you know all this stuff, but the way the brain works is to basically absorb in sensory data and then compare it with memory models of the world and create predictions about the world. And you're basically updating that prediction 3 times a second, roughly. And so you're taking in 10,000 or so data points every third of a second. When you're on a video call, that sensory data is extremely limited because there's no smell, there's sight, clearly, there's a little bit of audio sensory data to come in, but everything else is pretty much excluded. So your brain starts to get stressed by the fact that it's got lack of sensory data to use to create that predictive model. So it starts to search for other stimuli. And so you're just being prompted by your subconscious to look for other things that are going to you just get restless. And so you start to interpret that as a need to do something else. So people aren't behaving badly because they're just assholes. It's because that format of interaction limits the amount of input into your brain, and therefore you need to seek other stimuli in order to create that constant predictive model that is the way the brain functions.
See, I definitely can understand that, but I always assumed that it was also a consequence of people using video conferencing where they shouldn't have. We all know that saying of this could have been an email or a quick phone call. Why does it default to being a 30-minute video call? And I know we'd sort of previously just discussed the difference between maybe using the phone versus video as a tool for running an recovery or interrogating a brief. Is there still an element of that as well? Like, is it that if the meeting is high value enough, you can make the video call more engaging and you can kind of resist, or you can hack that biological urge? Or is it that's always going to be there and we just have to pick our moments, that we will deploy the video conferencing technology?
No, you definitely can hack it if you can be aware of it. So there's a few things you can do. First of all, one of the things that I would urge people not to do is simply you mentioned sort of the sales methodology. Do you have to adapt it for the channel that you're now being asked to work with? You don't abandon the sales methodology, but you do have to think about the communication methods. So don't just simply pick up what you would do in a face-to-face meeting and put that into an online setting and expect it to work. It simply won't. A 30-minute presentation followed by a Q&A isn't going to cut it. And you're also going to be unable to read the room, and you're not going to get a two-way flow of information. You're going to end up with a completely disengaged audience. So in order to make video calls work best, keep them short, high amounts of interactions. Most people know that by now. But there's also a healthy amount of stress that's needed. So in order to focus your attention, so think about a story, right? Think about how a movie or a book or a TV series grabs you. Generally speaking, you'll find a sort of a moment of high tension or confrontation or surprise early on in the story. It sets up interest. It means I want to read on. I want to continue watching because I want to see how this resolves. What that actually does is it peaks a cortisol release in your brain that makes you pay attention. There's something going on here which is interesting, and therefore I'm engaged and want to learn. If you don't do that, set that tension piece up in your video call, people are likely to lose interest. They're not going to focus attention on what's coming out of the screen at them. So how do you do that? Well, don't show them a PowerPoint with endless slides. I would urge people to, as I say, keep the dialogue going, but also introduce some element of tension through storytelling. So you can do that through using reference cases, use cases, case studies. This was a challenge that was faced by a similar business to yours. This is how that was resolved. Create that. It doesn't have to be high tension. It doesn't have to be Tom Cruise type tension. We're talking about just there's a human being facing a challenge that needs to be resolved. Telling stories in that way actually stimulate parts of the brain that focus attention. And if you can do that and keep your interaction short, maximum of 15 minutes, keep the dialogue at least every 3 minutes, make sure someone's interacting with you at least every 3 minutes, then you're in good shape.
Yeah, and I think 15 minutes is a great amount of time to be able to pitch most solutions. I mean, and I actually think, there's almost a paradox. Like, no, this is a big, complex contract, partnership proposal we're putting together with all of this information. It's like even more need to simplify and keep it to 15 minutes. It's like the more information, the more you need to actually really simplify and build the narrative structure. Is there a relationship between the number of people on a video call and the engagement of the group? Because obviously somebody one-to-one, you can tell if they're multitasking, it's a little bit easier to keep them honest or to keep the interactivity. What happens when we're on these calls with 10, 12, sometimes as many as 20 people, like a full agency kind of presentation? Is that fraught with danger in that the more people on a call, the less engagement you get from the group as a whole?
Yes. There's that scientific rule that says that every person who joins a task, everyone on the task becomes half as engaged. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. When we look at the data on this, the two reasons that people disengage from video conferences is because there are too many attendees or it goes on too long. And by going on too long, we mean over 18 minutes. 18 minutes seems to be the sweet spot. So our recommendations on those things are, if you can, break your communication up. If you've got a call with more than about 15 attendees, try and have that same conversation multiple times with smaller groups. That's not always going to be possible, but it's definitely more. You'll get more engagement that way. And similarly, if you've got a long meeting ahead of you, make sure that you're offering the chance to break that up. So give people 15 minutes break, come back or reconvene in sort of chapters. And don't try and do everything at once. And it's tempting to say, I've got the client in front of me, I want to do everything right now. But you'll get that fatigue very, very quickly if you do that.
I love that suggestion of break it up into smaller groups. And yes, it requires you to do more meetings, but the net result is you're going to have a more engaged audience collectively when you put it together. You're doing a lot of consulting, I know, with buyers, with agencies on the client side, people who are being sold to. Curious to get your perspective and if you've observed anything happening in this space compared to maybe a year or two ago, where a lot of advertising agencies were going, this is great, right? I don't have a media salesperson coming in and taking an hour of five of my different people's times. They can just all jump on the one video call, give us the one update together. It's 1 hour. We've just optimized the whole thing. This is so much more productive. Where are the agencies, in your observation, kind of sitting with this? Are they seeing that that's a bit of a low return style activity? Do they still feel it has a place? Anything that they've shared from that perspective of being the buyer?
Well, it's really interesting. The agencies are all struggling with the last couple of years that have put a big emphasis on, wellness, but personal health, work-life balance, making sure that everyone's being looked after. There's an excellent development in our industry, frankly. But now they've also the other benefit, of course, is they can go to smaller offices where they haven't got to have desks for everyone all the time, because only 70% of the staff will be in at any given moment.
Yep.
But they've now wrestling with, we need people to come back into the office because we need people to collaborate. We need all of the good cultural benefit that you get from people being co-located, and the human to human interaction that is necessary in order to run a business successfully. So they've got this this dilemma of we want to make it as flexible as possible, but we really need you in the office. I say that the rank and file of the agency land has limited appetite. Wants to be in part of the week, but really wants to spend the bulk of the week at home, and for exactly the reasons you describe. Because more and more of the job is head down, bum up, number crunching, report writing, doing colouring in, and that is productive work if you can isolate the distractions. And as you say, I don't have to spend an hour of my time having coffee with somebody who after 5 minutes I know is not going to add a lot of value to my day. So there is definitely this tension between wanting to get people back into the office for the good of the culture, and people resisting because I don't want to get on. I don't want to risk getting COVID on the bus and waste my time in coffee conversations when I could be just getting productive work done. So it is tricky. I think when people do what we are seeing though, and the data supports this, that if agency folk do come back to the office and spend time there, that there's a direct correlation between those who are spending more time in the office and those who are happier. So there is an association there. People are actually getting benefit from being around other humans on a regular basis. But it's a bit like exercise. Those who exercise very frequently generally have better mental health. But getting people to do it in the first place is pretty hard.
It's a really interesting area. My perspective on it is obviously clouded by my own experience. But the one thing I would say is, and that I've heard that really resonated with me. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell said it on a podcast. He said, if you're working from home 5 days a week and you're in your pajamas and you're living through the video conferencing technology and you're just doing it's like you've actually diminished your life to something, when you really think about it, like down to something quite small. Like if you think about the best moments of our work life, they're rarely about the actual work. They're often about the camaraderie and the collaboration and the social aspect and the chance to kind of really celebrate with your co-workers. And I thought that really resonated with me. I'm not saying that working from home doesn't have massive benefits, things like deep work and being able to kind of minimise, the commute, particularly anyone in North Sydney or in Sydney in general. I can really empathise where sometimes there might be a 2-hour traffic delay where they could go, why didn't I just stay home? But I guess what I'm always curious about is if things are going to settle, how do they settle? Either way, there's less opportunity for face-to-face interaction from a publisher to a media agency or to an extent to clients. And I just think that's where we haven't really landed on anywhere firm as to what the new rules of engagement actually look like.
No, I think that's true. Your point's, though, correct that the technology isn't going anywhere. We're not going to go back to the old way of working anytime soon. And this is going to become an increasing part of our lives. Certainly from an interstate point of view, the days of jumping on a plane and flying to Brisbane for the day and coming back again in the evening they've disappeared. They've gone for good. And that's probably good all round, really. I mean, it's good for not just the mental health of those people who do that, but also for the environment and for efficiency. So there's definitely benefits here. I think, though, we are seeing a backlash, and some people are starting to, especially client side, are starting to take meetings because they just want to see they just love that social element that they've missed for a couple of years.
Yep.
I'm anxious to see you in a face-to-face setting. I don't want to jump on another Teams call. So if we can't get together face-to-face, then you know what, let's not bother interacting at all for some time, until we can actually see each other face-to-face. So there's that's actually something which is I think quite a new phenomenon.
Yeah, I feel that. I definitely feel that. I mean, one of the things, I thought this was like the best idea ever, and it was only me doing it, but one of the things I started doing really early was going, everyone's working from home. That doesn't mean we can't grab a cafe nearby your house. I'll just drive out to the suburbs. That's a face-to-face meeting, but the context is different, right? You're sitting there over coffee or over food. You're not in a boardroom. You don't have a PowerPoint. It doesn't feel appropriate to pull out a laptop and start presenting. So whilst it's a face-to-face meeting, it's a relationship style meeting as opposed to, something that feels like a little bit more of a business meeting or agenda.
That's such a good point, and something that has arisen over the course of the pandemic that I think will remain a feature of our working lives is the ability to adapt our social interaction. So exactly to your point. So when we couldn't meet each other, when we had restrictions on how many bodies could be in the same 4 square meter area at any one time, people were going on walks. Remember that they'd sort of get together and you'd go on you'd have a walk around the park as a way of just interacting with others. And that, I think that I've certainly noticed that we've retained that, even as it's become easier to meet in traditional settings. We've retained that ability to know where people live and go and do something local to them, to go and interact socially in an unusual setting, like I know somebody who, for example, who still diarizes 3 or 4 social walks with their clients every week. I think that's a really good thing because it forces you into a more creative way of communicating. You will encode memory in a much stronger and deeper way if you can deliver a message in multiple modes, in multiple formats and multiple settings. So if I talk to you over a video call and show you an Excel, we share a screen, I show an Excel of my thinking, and then we get together and walk around a park when I can't really whip out a spreadsheet and talk you through it, but I talk through some concepts and high-level strategic thinking, which reinforce that. And then the third interaction is by phone, in which I try and close you on the deal. The memory you're taking away on that is multi-dimensional, multifaceted, and much more likely to resonate with you over a longer period because it's delivered in multi-modes and multiple settings.
Yeah, it's just like a media campaign with multiple touch points and channels.
Exactly the same.
It's interesting then. So we're talking... I remember this didn't land very well, but I had this idea in the pandemic of we were putting a new proposition out to market and we had a lot of collateral. And I was like, look, the sequencing here is easy. You book the meeting, you send them the link to the website, which gives a top line. You take them through the deck, you share a podcast with them afterwards, then you tag them in something on, like all of this stuff's here. Now, obviously you don't just spam them with 8 different messages, but you even start to see media companies are actually almost building out their suite of assets and their collateral in such a way that salespeople can be quite nimble and can kind of choose the right medium to, or combination of mediums to kind of bed a new message or proposition in the market. So if we think about this, like text, WhatsApp, email, voice messages, LinkedIn, in person, either formal or informal, video, these are all communication channels we have with clients. And I don't need us to go too deep into the weeds, but, in your experience, is there the quick high-level rundown on what are kind of the strengths of each of these different things, and when might we choose to use one over another? Is there any sort of framework that you're working on with people at the moment to kind of better define that whole world of all these channels?
Well, I don't think it's terribly complicated in terms of, it's common sense in terms of how you'd use certain channels. Email is a much more detailed communication device than, for example, text or through LinkedIn messaging. But what's really critical here is choosing the right channel and using that multimodal approach. One of the things that I've been doing recently is working with direct sales teams who do a lot of prospecting work. So these aren't working with agencies; they're going now directly to direct customers. And so that really everyone is their potential client. And that prospecting work, the 2 biggest flaws in prospecting that we see, the 2 biggest mistakes that commonly occur are, first of all, giving up too quickly, and secondly, making your communication too predictable. So where we see most success is in those salespeople who vary the mode of their communication. So I'm connecting with you on LinkedIn and I've sent you an in-mail through LinkedIn. I've tried to find you at an industry event. I've sent you an email to ask to diarize a call. I may have even direct mailed you in the old-fashioned way. And people are, texting and using WhatsApp and using other forms of communication. The most successful salespeople in that kind of outreach are doing that in planned multimodal phases and doing it typically 8 times in order to land a meeting with a new client. So don't give up too quickly and vary the type of approach that you have. And that's the secret to success.
I think that you can't understate the persistence, like 8 to 11 attempted contacts. I actually posted something on LinkedIn recently. I had somebody reach out to me 11 times before I actually took the call, before I was able to take the call, right? And that's nothing beyond just me prioritizing everything else in my world and them not really intercepting me at a time where I was available to chat, but we eventually had the call. And I actually wonder how many people give up after a second or third failed attempt.
Yeah, a huge number will do that, Jamie. And what we typically see is people either give up or they give up making the effort. So in other words, I might still make an outreach to you, but it will become pretty standardized. I started out by customizing my messaging. Hey, Jamie, I see that you've done this recently. I see you've posted about this on LinkedIn recently. Hey, it sparked my interest in how we might be able to help you in this regard, right? So that's my first outreach. It's very highly customized. It's really all about you and the research I've done on you. And my 4th or 5th outreach is just a standard, I'm just going to copy and paste this email that I sent to the last guy, and I'm just going to change the name to Jamie, and then I'll assume that's customized. And it's the contextualization, the customization of the messaging is highly, highly important. And as is the persistence element. So make sure that if you're going to remain so persistent, that you're still putting in the effort by outreach 11.
I remember one of my, we actually did a podcast. We did a podcast called Getting the Appointment with Jake Dunlap, who's the CEO of a company called Scaled. And they consult a lot to tech and SaaS businesses, particularly in North America. And he told me the story of a lot of sequencing that they do. So it'll be, I'll connect with you on LinkedIn. I'll engage with somebody in the comments of what they say. I'll then send them an email with something that references that. I then might send a video message via LinkedIn, and then a call. Like, they have these kind of plays that they deploy where it is like a multi-layered approach. Where they prime the prospect before they make that outreach, but it always seems to be the phone or a video message that they sort of send in is like not taking them down for the kill, but like that's the primary thing that they're almost gearing up towards, and they still acknowledge that the phone call is the number one way to still secure a meeting, even in 2022.
Funnily enough, this direct sales team that I've been most recently working with, they've tried an awful lot of structured, your point about playbook, they've tried to codify this into structured instruction to their teams. Start with a LinkedIn approach, then go to email, then go to the phone, and it works with some, it doesn't work. There is no formula for this. Yeah. Where they're landing is very similar to that experience. The really effective channels are phone call, cold calling. Cold calling is not dead.
No.
Walking off the street, would you believe, is still highly effective.
Well, it makes sense because those are still the least cluttered channels, right? Because they're the most intimidating. And I think, I still, as a sales director, many, many years since I've been a direct media salesperson, I still cold call, right? Because I want to keep that skill set sharp, and I want to still keep whatever chops I have developed, somewhat useful, because I still think it's the best way to connect with a new advertiser or new potential business partner. What I thought was actually an interesting story I was going to share too was there was a guy that I heard about in the States who was targeting like really senior, like CMO, C-suite level executives, and he was FaceTiming their mobile phones to request a meeting. I just thought that was, probably not as intimidating as a walk-in, but definitely a lot more intimidating than a phone call. Surprisingly, his strike rate was exceptional, because a lot of people just went, hey man, I got to give you props. It's just for the balls to FaceTime somebody and ask for a meeting.
Yeah, well, that's the point. The standout. That's we talk about it a lot, and it's absolutely critical. How can you stand out? And again, to that point about that I made earlier about surprise and tension, the element of I didn't expect that. That's something that's new to me. Creates that instant attention. It creates that instant sort of frisson of brain activity that says, "Hey, I need to pay attention to this," which is what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sort of dovetails into the last question, which is around, the role of body language and being able to interpret and read body language. And we did speak a lot in our previous episode about this too, but I think it's important to cover off again. If we don't have the ability to sit in a room and read the client body language, what other things can we observe, or what can we do on a video call in order to at least get a sense of what they're thinking and feeling? What's a proxy for those non-verbal cues we would otherwise be able to get really easily in a room?
I'm afraid the short answer and glib answer is that there is no substitute for being in the same room. But there are hacks and there are things to look out for. First of all, if you're in a call with multiple clients, and they may be either in the same room or they may be in separate rooms but on the same call, just notice how they interact with each other, because they will be sending each other messages about how they feel about what you're saying. So whether they're doing it, they may not be doing it consciously, but they will be doing it subconsciously. They would be wanting to communicate with other members of their tribe about what they think of your message. So look out for that. I would always recommend, by the way, if you are going to hold a video conference, that you ask to record it. And I know that people feel uncomfortable a bit about doing that, but generally speaking, people will. Well, first of all, they'll admire you for asking. If you can always give a reason in that we like to record these things, so we'd like to review them and see how we can improve. And with the same reason that you get for recording phone calls when you call a call center, we record these for training purposes. If you record something, you can go back and you can look for those non-verbal cues. You can look for what's maybe happening that is very difficult to pick up when you're in this setting. So look for how the other side interacts with each other, and then review the language that's being used, because the language is a big clue. The way that people form their language is prompted by mostly is prompted by their emotional reactions. So it's a good clue to how people are feeling, which is that with the words they select, the complexity of the language that they respond with, the length of their answers, all of these things are strong clues as to what's going on subconsciously in their brain. So even if you can't analyze that at the time in the moment, which is it takes a little bit of practice, is if you record it, you can go back and review.
I love that. It's a great tip. I mean, I had a final question for you, but you may have already answered it. I was going to say, what's like the Kinzler virtual selling hack? Like, if there's one thing that somebody could take away and develop immediately, which could be really worthwhile, what would that be? I think, first of all, asking to record a video is a bit of a game changer. But is there anything else that you sort of had there that you think maybe a media salesperson right now in this new sort of world, you go, this would actually be something that's coming through the market as genuine market signal that agencies and or clients are wanting from media salespeople? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind?
Well, there's a couple of things we think about. One of the things we do a lot of is unpack what goes on in a physical meeting and analyze why we have the rituals we do and what they actually do to promote collaboration and cooperation, and how difficult it is to replicate those on a video call, and how we can do that. One of the things we do in a physical meeting is that, generally speaking, while we're getting ready for the meeting to start and people to assemble and we're unpacking our stuff, we make small talk, right? That tends to disappear. We've seen a 60% drop in small talk since the start of the pandemic, according to the Harvard Business Review. So what's happening is people turn up on time. If people aren't ready, they mute and they go off and do other things while they get ready for the meeting. Make time for small talk, because small talk is extremely important in establishing common ground. It starts to disarm, starts to get people's collaborative juices flowing. The serotonin starts flowing in the brain. You start to lean in, because these are people with whom we share experience. So people in small talk about things that are important to them: their kids, where they live, the teams they support, their partner, the things that are really important to them. So when you start getting people talking about like that, then they start to create biological reactions that I am sharing important information and therefore I'm ready to collaborate fully. So make time for small talk. It doesn't have to be long, just make time for small talk. And the other thing is, show a little bit of kindness if you can. Kindness again creates that if you read any Robert Cialdini, you know the rule of reciprocation, right? If I'm showing some kindness, I'm likely to respond by wanting to do business with you. And by kindness, that can be really small things like sharing a Netflix series I'm watching at the moment. Have you got any tips on I'm down with COVID, I'm isolating. What should I be watching on one of the streaming platforms? I've got a tip for you. I've got a walking route you should take around because I know your suburb. Or I can help with the technology. I know how to whiteboard on Teams, so I can help with the technology. I know how to annotate really well. The tiny little things that help the day. They're acts of kindness that will actually, again, release the oxytocin and serotonin that's going to encourage collaboration.
I love that. That's unreal. Well, I feel like we could talk about this for a long time, and I don't think we're finished with this yet. I think things are going to continue to evolve, and some new unforeseen hidden challenges are going to arise. But for anyone else that does want to get in touch with Dave, I'm going to put your LinkedIn in the show notes. I'll put a link through to Kinzler as well. Dave, thanks once again, man. I always really enjoy talking to you. I think it's a really fascinating area that you are specializing in at the moment, and there's definitely a lot of value that I think people are going to take away from this episode and the previous one we've done as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jamie. Always fun.